The billionaire CEO's family drove her away. 4 years later, he saw her at the pediatric hospital with twins who looked just like him. "Alexander," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion building behind her eyes. "I'd like you to meet Micah and Maya. They're 3 years old." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "They're your children." The world seemed to tilt beneath Alexander's feet. He gripped the edge of the nearest chair, his eyes moving between the sleeping children and Naomi's face, searching for confirmation that he had heard her correctly. "My." The word came out strangled. "How is that possible?" "The usual way," Naomi said, a flash of her old wry humor surfacing briefly. "I was already pregnant when I left Boston. About 6 weeks along, though I didn't know it then." Alexander stared at the twins, really seeing them now. The boy had his dark hair and jawline, while the girl had inherited Naomi's delicate features combined with unmistakable Pierce characteristics. They were beautiful, perfect combinations of himself and the only woman he had ever truly loved. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know why." Naomi's expression hardened. "Your mother made it very clear what would happen to anyone who became pregnant with a Pierce heir. Your father threatened to destroy my medical career before it even began. And your sister promised to make sure I'd never work in any hospital in the country. Those weren't empty threats from your family, Alexander. They were promises. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to discover you've been a father for 3 years without knowing it? To realize that your own family's actions cost you precious years with your children? If you've ever experienced a moment that completely transformed your life in an instant, hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for stories that will touch your heart and remind you what truly matters. Hi, my beautiful sisters. Today's story is for every woman who has ever had to choose between her dreams and someone else's expectations. For every mother who has faced impossible choices to protect her children. For every heart that has been broken by the very people who should have embraced it. Naomi Turner's journey reminds us that sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's the strongest choice you can make. And sometimes, life gives second chances to those brave enough to stand their ground. Your worth isn't determined by anyone's family name or bank account. Your strength lies in knowing when to fight, when to flee, and when to forgive. Let's dive into this powerful story of love, loss, and unexpected reunion. The first time Alexander Pierce saw Naomi Turner after 4 years of silence, the world seemed to stop on its axis. He had been touring the newly constructed pediatric wing of St. Catherine's Hospital, a $50 million donation from Pierce Enterprises that the PR team insisted required the CEO's personal appearance. Alexander had been distracted, mentally reviewing quarterly projections while nodding at appropriate intervals as the hospital director droned on about state-of-the-art equipment and healing environments. Then he saw her. Naomi stood in the doorway of a patient room, her copper hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing scrubs that couldn't disguise the elegant lines of her body. She was speaking softly to a nurse, her hands moving in that expressive way he remembered so vividly, as though her words alone couldn't contain the fullness of her thoughts. For a moment, Alexander forgot to breathe. For years had softened nothing between them. The sight of her still struck him like a physical blow, awakening feelings he'd convinced himself were long buried. Then she turned, sensing his presence with that uncanny awareness she'd always possessed, and their eyes met across the gleaming hospital corridor. Recognition, shock, and something else, fear, flashed across her face before her expression closed completely, becoming the professional mask he'd never seen her wear during their time together. "Mr. Pierce?" the hospital director said, oblivious to the silent earthquake occurring beside him. "We're particularly proud of our oncology suite, which is just down this hallway." Alexander barely heard him. Naomi had disappeared back into the patient room, the door closing firmly behind her. His feet moved of their own accord, pulling him toward that closed door while his mind raced through the implications of her presence here. She had left Boston, left him, vanished so completely that even his considerable resources had failed to locate her. What was she doing back? And working at St. Catherine's, of all places? "Mr. Pierce." The director's voice penetrated his thoughts. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Alexander said automatically, forcing his attention back to the man. I just recognized someone. An old acquaintance. The word felt wrong in his mouth. Naomi had been so much more than an acquaintance. She had been his salvation, his joy, his future, until his family had systematically destroyed what they'd built together. Perhaps we could continue the tour another time, Alexander suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't actually a request. I'd like a moment alone. The director nodded quickly, years of dealing with wealthy donors having taught him when to press and when to retreat. Of course, my assistant will contact your office to reschedule. Alexander waited until the man had disappeared around the corner before approaching the door Naomi had entered. The small window revealed a pediatric room, cheerfully decorated with space-themed murals. His eyes swept the space, finding Naomi bent over a hospital bed that contained a small figure. He hesitated, hand poised to knock. What right did he have to intrude on her life now, after everything that had happened, after what his family had done to her? Before he could decide, the door swung open, and Naomi stood before him, her green eyes hard with determination. Not here, she said quietly. Whatever you want to say, it can't be here. Alexander nodded, suddenly aware of how imposing he must appear in his bespoke suit, towering over her in the doorway of a child's hospital room. When do you finish your shift? He asked, his voice low. 6. She glanced back into the room, protective. The cafeteria on the 3rd floor. 6:30. It wasn't an invitation so much as a tactical decision, a public place where she could control the encounter. Alexander recognized the strategy and respected it. I'll be there. Naomi nodded once, then closed the door between them. For the next 4 hours, Alexander canceled meetings, rearranged calls, and paced his office overlooking the Boston skyline. His mind replayed their brief interaction, analyzing every nuance of her expression, her posture, her voice. She had changed. There was a new steadiness to her, a contained strength that hadn't been there before. The Naomi he had fallen in love with 4 years ago had been brilliant but uncertain of her place in the world. A scholarship student at Harvard Medical School, she had been working part-time at a coffee shop near Pierce Enterprises headquarters when they first met. Alexander had been struck immediately by her quick mind and genuine warmth, qualities rarely found in his usual social circles. Their relationship had developed quickly, intensely. For the first time in his life, Alexander had found someone who saw him as more than the Pierce heir, more than a business titan or a desirable match. Naomi had challenged him, made him laugh, drawn out parts of himself he hadn't known existed. And then his family had discovered that their son was seriously involved with a nobody, a scholarship student with no connections, no fortune, no pedigree. What had followed was a systematic campaign to separate them, culminating in that disastrous charity gala where his mother had publicly humiliated Naomi. His father had threatened her future career, and his sister had spread vicious rumors throughout Boston society. And Alexander, to his eternal shame, had failed to take a stand. He had tried to smooth things over privately, to reason with his family behind closed doors, to find a compromise that would allow him to keep both his birthright and the woman he loved. By the time he realized no such compromise existed, Naomi was gone, disappeared without a trace, leaving only a brief note. I deserve better than to be someone's secret shame. She had been right, of course. He had known it then, and he knew it now, standing in his office 4 years later, preparing to face her again. At precisely 6:15, Alexander entered the hospital cafeteria, selecting a table in the corner that offered some privacy while remaining in full view of the room. Old habits made him sit facing the entrance, watching as medical staff in various colored scrubs filtered in and out. At 6:32, Naomi appeared, her hair now loose around her shoulders, scrubs replaced by jeans and a simple blouse. She spotted him immediately, her stride purposeful as she crossed the room. You look well, he said as she sat across from him, the inadequacy of the words striking him as soon as they left his mouth. What do you want, Alexander? No preamble, no small talk. This too was new. The Naomi he had known had been unfailingly polite, sometimes to her detriment. I didn't know you were back in Boston, he said, studying her face. The delicate freckles across her nose had multiplied. She'd been somewhere sunny. Or that you were working at St. Catherine's. I've been back 6 months. She met his gaze directly. I'm completing my pediatric residency here. Dr. Naomi Turner. She had finished medical school then. He felt a surge of pride that he had no right to claim. Congratulations, he said sincerely. You always said you would. Something flickered in her eyes. A memory, perhaps, of late nights studying while he brought her coffee and quizzed her on anatomy terms he could barely pronounce. Is that why you wanted to talk? To congratulate me on my career? Her tone was even controlled. No. Alexander leaned forward slightly. I wanted to apologize. For everything that happened. For what my family did to you. For not stopping them. Naomi's composure wavered for just a moment. Surprise crossing her features before she recovered. Whatever she had expected from this meeting, it wasn't an apology. It's been 4 years, she said finally. I know. I should have said it then. I should have done more than say it. I should have acted differently. He paused. The words he'd rehearsed in his office suddenly inadequate. I've thought about you every day since you left. Don't. Her voice sharpened. We're not doing this, Alexander. You don't get to walk back into my life with apologies and regrets after 4 years of silence. You disappeared, he countered, an edge entering his own voice. I tried to find you. Not hard enough. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. And maybe I needed to disappear. Your mother had just publicly humiliated me at your company's charity gala. Your father had threatened to ruin my medical career before it even started. Your sister had spread rumors about me throughout Boston society. Her hands clenched on the table. And you stood by and watched it happen. The truth of her words hit him like physical blows. He had watched it happen, telling himself he was protecting her by not engaging, by trying to reason privately with his family rather than publicly defending her. He had been a coward, prioritizing Pierce Enterprises' stability and his family's dynasty over the woman he claimed to love. You're right, he said simply. I failed you completely. Naomi blinked, clearly thrown by his admission. The Alexander she had known rarely conceded any point so directly. Well, she said after a moment. That's something at least. A silence fell between them, less hostile than before but still charged with unspoken history. The patient you were visiting, Alexander said finally. Family? Something shifted in Naomi's expression, a wariness entering her eyes. Yes. I hope they're recovering well. They are. She glanced at her watch. I should go. I have rounds early tomorrow. As she stood to leave, Alexander found himself desperate to prolong their contact, to find some way back into her life, however tenuous. Naomi, he said quickly, would you have coffee with me sometime? Properly, I mean, not in a hospital cafeteria. She hesitated, studying him with those perceptive green eyes that had always seen through his carefully constructed facades. I don't think that's a good idea. Please. He rarely used that word, had been taught from childhood that Pierces didn't plead for anything. But he used it now. One coffee. I just want to talk. About what, Alexander? The past is done. We've both moved on. Have we? He challenged softly. Something complicated passed across her face. I have to go. She turned and walked away, her back straight, not looking back even once. Alexander watched her disappear through the cafeteria doors, the familiar ache of her absence settling into his chest once more. But something had changed. She was back in Boston. She had agreed to meet him, however briefly. It was more than he'd had in 4 years, and Alexander Pierce had built an empire on recognizing opportunities in the smallest openings. He would see her again. He just needed to be patient. If you've ever had to rebuild a bridge you once burned, hit that like button. And if you believe that true redemption requires more than just words, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for stories that explore the complicated path to forgiveness. 3 days later, Alexander was reviewing acquisition proposals in his office when his assistant interrupted with an urgent call. Sir, there's a Dr. Turner on line 1. She says it's important. Alexander's heart rate doubled instantly. Put her through. There was a click. Then Naomi's voice, tense and professional. Alexander, I need you to come to St. Catherine's. Room 412. Now. What's happened? Are you all right? Just come. Please. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, Alexander strode through the pediatric ward, his mind racing with possibilities. Had Naomi been injured? Was she ill? The fear that had gripped him since her call made it difficult to maintain his usual composed demeanor. Room 412 had a colorful sign on the door reading Micah's space station. Alexander knocked once, then entered to find Naomi standing beside a hospital bed where a small boy of about 3 lay sleeping, and 4 attached to his arm and monitoring equipment surrounding him. Thank you for coming, Naomi said quietly, her face drawn with exhaustion. Of course. Alexander approached cautiously, his eyes drawn to the child. Something about the boy's features, the straight nose, the set of his jaw even in sleep, struck a chord of recognition. What's going on, Naomi? Who is this? Before she could answer, a nurse entered carrying another child, a little girl, identical to the boy except for her longer hair, also sleeping. The sedative worked quickly, the nurse said to Naomi. Her fever's down to 101.2. Thank you, Jen, Naomi replied, taking the child and gently placing her in a second bed beside the boys. Could you give us a few minutes? When the nurse had gone, Naomi turned to face Alexander fully, her expression a complex mixture of determination and vulnerability he'd never seen before. Alexander, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion he could see building behind her eyes. I'd like you to meet Micah and Maya. They're 3 years old. She paused, drawing a deep breath. They're your children. The world seemed to tilt beneath Alexander's feet. He gripped the edge of the nearest chair, his eyes moving between the sleeping children and Naomi's face, searching for confirmation that he had heard her correctly. My! The word came out strangled. How is that possible? The usual way, Naomi said, a flash of her old wry humor surfacing briefly. I was already pregnant when I left Boston. About 6 weeks along, though I didn't know it then. Alexander stared at the twins, really seeing them now. The boy, Micah, had his dark hair and jawline, while the girl had inherited Naomi's delicate features combined with unmistakable Pierce characteristics. They were beautiful, perfect combinations of himself and the only woman he had ever truly loved. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You know why. Naomi's expression hardened slightly. Your mother made it very clear what would happen to anyone who became pregnant with a Pierce heir. Your father threatened to destroy my medical career before it even began. And your sister promised to make sure I'd never work in any hospital in the country. Those weren't empty threats from your family, Alexander. They were promises. He did recall the memory of his mother's cruel speech at the charity gala, delivered with a champagne flute in hand and a smile on her face as she systematically destroyed Naomi's reputation, was seared into his mind. They're sick? He asked, nodding toward the twins. Micah has pneumonia. Maya developed a sympathetic fever. They've always been connected that way. Naomi rubbed her temples. They're responding well to antibiotics, but Micah's asthma complicates things. Asthma? Alexander felt each new piece of information like a physical blow. His children had been alive for 3 years. They had personalities, medical histories, favorite foods and colors and stories, and he had missed all of it. He inherited it from your side, Naomi said. Your sister had childhood asthma, didn't she? Alexander nodded numbly, remembering Elisa's breathing treatments when they were young. Why tell me now, after 3 years? Naomi sank into a chair, suddenly looking every bit as exhausted as she must have felt. Because they're asking about their father. Because hiding them from you was never my plan, it was just survival. Because... She looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. Because they deserve to know you, regardless of our past. Alexander moved slowly to the space between the 2 small beds, looking down at his sleeping children. His throat tightened with an emotion he couldn't name. grief and joy and rage and wonder all tangled together. "I've missed everything," he said softly. "Not everything," Naomi replied. "There are only 3. There's still so much ahead, if you want to be part of it." "If I want?" Alexander turned to her, incredulous. "Of course I want to be part of their lives. They're my children, Naomi." "It's not that simple, Alexander. You come with complications. Your family." "My family has no say in this," he interrupted, a cold determination settling over him. "Not anymore." Naomi studied him, searching for something in his expression. "You've changed." Yes, it was the simple truth. The past 4 years had transformed him, stripped away illusions about his family's dynasty and his place within it. "After you left, I started seeing things differently. The company, my parents, the life I thought I was supposed to want." He paused. "I've been dismantling my father's power structure at Pierce Enterprises for the past 2 years. He and my mother moved to the Cayman Islands last summer, partly in protest, partly for tax reasons." Surprise flickered across Naomi's face. "I hadn't heard. I've changed other things too." Alexander hesitated, then continued. "I established a foundation for first-generation medical students. It provides full scholarships and living stipends." He didn't add that he had named it after her, or that he reviewed each candidate personally, looking for the same determination and compassion that had drawn him to Naomi. Before she could respond, Micah stirred, his small face scrunching as he blinked awake. "Mommy?" he called, voice raspy from sleep and illness. Naomi was at his side instantly. "I'm here, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Thirsty." The boy's gaze drifted to Alexander, curiosity replacing drowsiness. "Who's that?" Alexander felt frozen, overwhelmed by the direct gaze of his son. His son. Seeing him for the first time, Naomi glanced at Alexander, a silent question in her eyes. When he nodded, she turned back to Micah. "This is Alexander," she said gently. He's your father." Micah's eyes widened, suddenly looking even more like Alexander's. "For real? For real," Alexander confirmed, finding his voice as he moved closer to the bed. "It's very nice to meet you, Micah." The boy studied him with solemn intensity. "Do you like rockets?" Alexander felt a smile tug at his lips. "I do. Very much." "Me too," Micah said, as if this settled something important. "Maya likes stars better. She's still sleeping." "I can see that." Alexander glanced at the other bed where Maya remained peacefully asleep. "Your mom tells me you haven't been feeling well." Micah nodded, pointing to his chest. "My lungs got sick, but Dr. Wilson says I'm being very brave." "You certainly are," Alexander agreed, fighting the urge to reach out and touch the boy's hair, to confirm he was real. A small hand emerged from the blankets, reaching toward him. "You can hold my hand if you want. Mommy says it helps with the scary stuff." Alexander gently took his son's hand, marveling at how tiny it was within his own. Something profound shifted inside him. A tectonic realignment of priorities, of purpose, of identity. In that moment, holding Micah's small hand, Alexander Pierce became a father in more than just biology. "Does it help?" Micah asked, watching Alexander's face with curious intensity. "With the scary stuff?" "Yes," Alexander answered truthfully. "It helps very much." Naomi observed this exchange silently, her expression unreadable as she adjusted Micah's foreline. The moment was interrupted when Maya stirred in the adjacent bed, her eyes fluttering open. "Mommy?" she called, voice small and confused. "I'm here, sweetheart." Naomi moved to Maya's bedside, brushing dark curls from the little girl's forehead. "How's my brave girl feeling?" "My head hurts," Maya mumbled, then noticed Alexander. Unlike her brother's immediate curiosity, Maya regarded the stranger with cautious assessment, her eyes, so like Naomi's in shape but with Alexander's deep blue color, narrowing slightly. "Who's that?" Before Naomi could answer, Micah called out excitedly, "That's our dad. He likes rockets." Maya's expression remained skeptical. "For real?" Alexander approached her bed slowly, recognizing the wariness in her gaze, the same expression he'd seen in board meetings when someone was presenting questionable data. His daughter was already a critical thinker. "For real," he confirmed softly. "My name is Alexander." "I'm Maya," she replied formally, as though introducing herself at a diplomatic function rather than from a hospital bed. "I'm 3.5. "It's an honor to meet you, Maya," Alexander responded with equal formality, instinctively understanding this child required a different approach than her brother. Maya studied him for a long moment, then asked, "Where were you before?" The directness of the question struck Alexander like a physical blow. He glanced at Naomi, who gave a small nod, encouraging him to answer honestly. "I was here in Boston," he said carefully. "I didn't know about you and Micah until today." "Why not?" Maya pressed, her young face serious. Alexander hesitated, searching for words a 3-year-old might understand. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Big mistakes. I made some, and because of that, your mom and I were apart when you were born." Maya considered this, then declared with the absolute certainty of childhood, "You should say sorry." A surprised laugh escaped Alexander. "You're absolutely right. I should." He looked at Naomi, holding her gaze as he spoke. "I am deeply, truly sorry." Something softened in Naomi's expression, though she quickly masked it as she checked Maya's temperature with the back of her hand. "Can you stay?" Micah asked, his voice hopeful. "Mommy says we have to be in the hospital until my lungs get better." "I'd like to stay," Alexander replied, looking to Naomi for permission. "If that's all right with your mother." Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "For a while. But the twins need rest, and visiting hours end at 8. The next hour passed in a blur of revelation for Alexander. He watched, fascinated, as Micah enthusiastically explained his favorite space facts despite his raspy breathing, while Maya quietly assessed him between sips of apple juice. They were so different. Micah open and exuberant even while ill, Maya thoughtful and reserved. Yet both unmistakably carried the Pierce intensity, the focused intelligence he recognized from his own childhood. When a nurse arrived to administer another round of medication, Naomi suggested Alexander step out with her into the hallway. "They're extraordinary," he said once they were alone, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, they are." Pride shone in Naomi's eyes. "They've been my whole world." "How have you managed?" "Medical residency with twins." Alexander stopped himself, realizing how the question might sound. "I don't mean financially. I mean the logistics, the time." "It hasn't been easy," Naomi admitted. "My parents help when they can, but they're in Arizona now. I have a wonderful neighbor who watches them when I'm on call. The residency program has been accommodating." She shrugged slightly. "We make it work." Alexander nodded, processing this glimpse into their lives. Lives that had continued, full and complex, without him. "I want to be part of their lives, Naomi. Not just financially, though of course I'll provide whatever they need. I want to know them, to be their father in every sense." Naomi studied him, her expression guarded. "And when your family finds out, when they realize I've returned with not one but 2 Pierce heirs." "My family's influence is not what it was," Alexander said firmly. "My father no longer controls the board. My mother's social circle has largely abandoned her after certain financial improprieties came to light. And Elise," he paused. "Elise actually apologized to me last year for her role in what happened with you. She's been through some difficult experiences of her own that changed her perspective." Naomi looked skeptical. "People don't change that fundamentally, Alexander." "Some do," he countered quietly. "When they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. When they lose something irreplaceable." His eyes held hers. "When they realize too late what truly matters." A charged silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken history and the ghost of what they had once been to each other. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Alexander continued. "I'm not even asking for a second chance with you, though God knows I want one. I'm just asking for the opportunity to be a father to Micah and Maya." Naomi turned away, looking through the window into the hospital room where their children were now both drowsing after their medication. "They've asked about you," she said softly. "Especially recently. Maya wanted to know why other children at preschool had daddies and they didn't." "What did you tell them?" "That their father lived far away. That he was a good man who would have loved them very much if he had known them." She glanced back at him. "I never spoke badly of you to them, Alexander. Whatever was between us, they deserved the chance to form their own opinions of their father." Gratitude washed through him. Even after everything, she had protected his relationship with children he hadn't known existed. It was more generosity than he deserved. "Thank you," he said simply. Naomi nodded, then checked her watch. "Visiting hours are almost over. They need rest, and I have early rounds tomorrow." "Of course." Alexander hesitated. "May I come back tomorrow?" "They'd like that." Naomi's expression softened slightly. "They've already decided you're acceptable, which is quite an achievement. Maya doesn't warm to people easily." "She reminds me of you," Alexander said with a small smile. "Cautious. Analytical." "She reminds me of you," Naomi countered. "Stubborn. Precise in her language. Impossible to distract once she's focused on something." They shared a moment of connection in this mutual recognition of their children, before Naomi's professional mask slipped back into place. Tomorrow afternoon would be best. They're usually more energetic after lunch. "I'll be here," Alexander promised. He wanted to say more, so much more, but restrained himself. This fragile new beginning was too precious to risk with hasty words or premature hopes. As he turned to leave, Naomi called after him softly, "Alexander!" He looked back, heart quickening at something in her tone. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you might have changed after all. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was acknowledgement, and for now that was enough." If you've ever had to rebuild trust after it was broken, or if you've witnessed how children can transform even the most guarded hearts, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. The journey of Alexander, Naomi, and their twins is just beginning, and I promise you won't want to miss what happens next. The night after meeting his children for the first time, Alexander barely slept. He lay awake in his penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, his mind racing with images of tiny hands and solemn blue eyes, of Micah's enthusiastic chatter and Maya's careful assessment. His children. The words still felt surreal, miraculous, and devastating in equal measure. By morning, he had made several decisions. First, he called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the next 2 weeks, delegating critical meetings to his executive team. Then he contacted his lawyer to begin establishing trust funds for the twins. Finally, he made a call he'd been avoiding for years. "Alexander!" His sister's voice held surprise. "It's been months. Is everything all right?" "Elise," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. "I need to tell you something important. Something that will eventually reach Mother and Father. But I wanted you to hear it from me first." "You sound serious. What's happened?" "I've just discovered I'm a father. Twins. A boy and a girl. They're 3 years old." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Naomi?" Elise finally asked. "Yes." Another pause. "She's back in Boston?" "She's completing her pediatric residency at St. Catherine's. I ran into her during the hospital tour 3 days ago." "And she just told you about the children? After 3 years?" Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. "She had good reason not to tell me, Elise. Or have you forgotten how our family treated her?" His sister's sigh carried through the line. "No, I haven't forgotten." Her voice softened. "What are they like, your children?" The unexpected question caught Alexander off guard. "They're extraordinary. The boy, Micah, is enthusiastic and open. The girl, Maya, is more reserved, analytical. They both love space, stars and rockets." "They sound wonderful," Elise said, and to his surprise, her voice held genuine warmth. "I meant what I said last year, Alexander. I'm truly sorry for my part in what happened with Naomi. I was cruel and thoughtless. If there's any way I can make amends now." "Actually, there is." Alexander took a deep breath. When mother and father find out about this, they'll likely try to interfere. I need to know you won't help them. I won't, Elise promised immediately. In fact, I'll run interference if needed. They don't have the same hold over me they once did. Thank you. Alexander hesitated, then added, the twins might like to meet their aunt someday, when things are more settled. I'd like that very much. Elise's voice caught slightly. Congratulations, Alexander. Truly. After hanging up, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His relationship with his sister had been strained for years, first by her role in Naomi's departure, then by his gradual distancing from the family's toxic dynamics. This conversation felt like the beginning of something new, a tentative bridge across old wounds. At the hospital that afternoon, Alexander arrived carrying two carefully selected gifts. For Micah, a detailed model rocket kit designed for parent-child assembly. For Maya, a book about the constellations with stunning photographs and simple explanations perfect for a precocious 3-year-old. He found the twins sitting up in their beds, looking markedly better than the day before. Micah's breathing seemed easier, and Maya's fever had clearly broken, her eyes bright and alert as she colored in a space-themed coloring book. You came back, Micah exclaimed when Alexander entered, his face lighting up with unguarded delight. I promised I would, Alexander replied, setting the gifts on the foot of each bed. And I brought you both something. Micah tore into his package immediately, gasping with excitement at the rocket kit. Mom, look, we can build it together. Maya, true to her more cautious nature, carefully unwrapped her gift, examining the book with serious concentration before looking up at Alexander. Thank you, she said formally. I like stars very much. I thought you might, Alexander replied, equally formal. Perhaps we could look at it together? Maya considered this, then nodded, patting the edge of her bed in invitation. Alexander sat carefully beside her, hyper-aware of how small she was, how fragile. As they began paging through the book, Maya gradually relaxed, her natural curiosity overcoming her reserve as she asked increasingly detailed questions about nebulae and black holes. Across the room, Naomi entered, still in her scrubs, clearly having come directly from her rounds. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Alexander reading with Maya, Micah excitedly explaining the rocket kit he planned to build. Something complicated passed across her face before she schooled her expression. How are my space explorers feeling today? She asked, moving to check Micah's temperature with the back of her hand. Better, Micah declared. Dr. Wilson said maybe we can go home tomorrow if my breathing stays good. That's the plan, Naomi confirmed, glancing at Alexander. His latest chest X-ray shows significant improvement. That's wonderful news, Alexander said, carefully closing the star book as Maya stifled a yawn. You both seem tired. Perhaps I should let you rest. No, Micah protested immediately. You just got here. Tell us a story first. A story, Alexander repeated, momentarily at a loss. About when you were little, Maya clarified, her serious eyes fixed on his face. Mommy tells us stories about when she was little. Did you like space when you were a boy? Alexander glanced at Naomi, who gave a small nod of encouragement. I did, actually, he said, settling more comfortably on the edge of Maya's bed. When I was about 8 years old, my father bought me a telescope for Christmas. It wasn't a very good one, just a beginner model, but I thought it was magical. Did you see planets? Micah asked eagerly. I did. I set it up on the roof of our house, which I wasn't supposed to do, Alexander admitted with a conspiratorial smile. My sister Elise, your aunt, would keep watch while I climbed out the attic window with my star charts and notebook. You have a sister? Maya's eyes widened slightly. We have an aunt? Yes, Alexander confirmed, realizing how much of his life, his family, was unknown to them. Her name is Elise. She's 3 years younger than me. Does she like space too? Micah wanted to know. Not as much as I did. She preferred books about explorers and adventurers. Alexander smiled at the memory. But she helped me with my stargazing because she knew how much I loved it. Will we meet her? Maya asked, her directness catching Alexander off guard again. I hope so, he answered honestly. I spoke with her this morning, and she's very excited to know about you both. Naomi looked up sharply at this, but said nothing, busying herself with adjusting Micah's pillows. What about your mom and dad? Micah asked innocently. Are they our grandma and grandpa? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken complications. Alexander chose his words carefully. They are your grandparents, yes, but they live very far away now, in a place called the Cayman Islands. That's okay, Micah said easily. We have Grandma and Grandpa Turner. They live in Arizona, which is also far away, but they send us presents and talk to us on the computer. They sound wonderful, Alexander said sincerely, grateful to Naomi's parents for being there when his own family had failed so completely. They are, Naomi confirmed quietly. They've been incredibly supportive. The conversation continued for another half hour, the twins gradually growing drowsy as the afternoon wore on. When both children had finally drifted off to sleep, Naomi gestured for Alexander to join her in the hallway. You told your sister, she said once they were alone, her voice carefully neutral. Yes, I wanted her to hear it from me, not through the family grapevine. Alexander studied Naomi's face, trying to read her reaction. She's changed, Naomi. She expressed genuine remorse for her role in what happened. People say many things when confronted with the consequences of their actions, Naomi replied, though her tone lacked the edge he might have expected. What matters is what she does now. She offered to run interference with my parents when they inevitably find out. Naomi raised an eyebrow. And you believe her? I do. Alexander hesitated, then added, the family dynamics have shifted significantly in the past few years. My father's health scare 2 years ago, combined with some questionable financial decisions, weakened his position considerably. My mother's social standing collapsed after a scandal involving misappropriated charity funds. And Elise. He paused. Elise went through a difficult divorce that opened her eyes to many things. I see. Naomi was quiet for a moment, processing this information. And what about you, Alexander? What changed you? The question was direct, penetrating, pure Naomi. Alexander considered his answer carefully. Losing you, he said finally. Realizing what I had sacrificed for a family legacy that suddenly seemed hollow. Watching my father manipulate and control everyone around him and recognizing those same tendencies in myself. He met her gaze steadily. I've spent 4 years trying to become someone different from the man who let you walk away. Naomi looked away, her profile illuminated by the harsh hospital lighting. The twins' doctor wants to discharge them tomorrow morning, assuming Micah's breathing remains stable overnight. Alexander accepted the change of subject. That's excellent news. Is there anything I can do to help with the transition home? Actually, yes. Naomi turned back to him. They'll need to remain quiet for a few days, which is challenging with 3-year-olds. Having new activities and gentle entertainment would help. If you'd like to visit tomorrow evening. She left the invitation hanging. I'd like that very much, Alexander said, careful not to reveal how much the casual invitation meant to him. What time would be best? Around 6? After they've had dinner and settled a bit. 6 it is. Alexander hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on him. Naomi, what have you told them about me? Before yesterday, she sighed softly. Not much, honestly. When they first started asking about their father around their 2nd birthday, I told them you lived far away. As they got older and the questions became more specific, I said you were a good man who didn't know about them, but who would have loved them if you had. She met his eyes directly. I never wanted them to feel unwanted or abandoned, Alexander. Whatever happened between us, that wasn't their burden to carry. The generosity of this stunned him. After everything his family had done, after his own failure to stand by her, Naomi had still protected his image in the eyes of their children. Thank you, he said simply. the words wholly inadequate for the depth of his gratitude. Naomi nodded, then glanced at her watch. I need to check on a few other patients before my shift ends. Will you stay with them until I get back? Of course. As Naomi walked away, Alexander returned to the twins' room, settling into the chair between their beds. Looking at their peaceful sleeping faces, he made a silent vow. He would be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. He would be the father these children deserved, and perhaps someday the man Naomi had once believed him to be. If you've ever been given a second chance you weren't sure you deserved, hit that like button. And if you believe that our past mistakes don't have to define our future, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories of redemption, forgiveness, and the transformative power of love. The next evening, Alexander arrived at Naomi's apartment precisely at 6, carrying a carefully selected assortment of quiet activities for the twins. The building was modest but well-maintained, located in a family-friendly neighborhood not far from the hospital. As he approached the door to apartment 3B, he felt an unexpected nervousness. This was different from hospital visits. This was entering their home, their established life, a life that had been built entirely without him. Micah answered his knock with excited energy that belied his recent illness. Dad, you came. Mom said you would, but sometimes grown-ups forget their promises. The casual dad sent a jolt through Alexander's chest. It had been less than 48 hours since he'd learned of the twins' existence, yet Micah had already embraced him with the unguarded acceptance only a child could offer. I try never to break my promises, Alexander said seriously, stepping into the apartment, especially important ones. The space was warm and inviting, clearly decorated with children in mind, but with Naomi's distinctive touch evident in the carefully chosen artwork and organized bookshelves. Medical textbooks shared space with children's stories. A small dining table was covered with art supplies. The furniture was modest but comfortable, creating a home that felt lived in and loved. Maya appeared from what Alexander assumed was the children's bedroom, moving with more reserve than her brother but with clear curiosity in her eyes. Hello, she greeted formally. Did you bring more books? Alexander smiled, kneeling to her level. I brought several things I thought you both might enjoy while you're recovering. He opened the large bag he carried, revealing puzzle books, modeling clay, a simple board game, and yes, more books, this time about the solar system and space exploration. Cool, Micah exclaimed, immediately reaching for the modeling clay. Can we make planets? That sounds like an excellent project, Alexander agreed, glancing up as Naomi emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. I see you've been properly greeted, she said with a small smile. They've been watching the window for the past hour. I'm honored, Alexander replied, rising to his feet. How are they feeling? Much better. Micah's breathing is almost back to normal, though he'll need to use his inhaler for another week as a precaution. She gestured toward the living room. Make yourself comfortable. I was just finishing dinner preparations. Can I help with anything? Naomi looked momentarily surprised by the offer. Actually, if you could help the twins wash up, that would be helpful. The bathroom is down the hall. The simple domestic task, helping small hands with soap and water, ensuring sleeves stayed dry, mediating a minor dispute over whose turn it was to use the dinosaur towel, felt strangely significant to Alexander. These were the everyday moments he had missed for 3 years, the routine interactions that built a parent-child relationship. Dinner was a simple affair. Chicken soup and homemade bread that Naomi explained her neighbor had brought over. The twins chattered throughout the meal, Micah dominating the conversation with elaborate plans for rocket building, while Maya occasionally interjected with surprisingly insightful questions about how real rockets worked. You know a lot about space for someone who works with money, Maya observed, fixing Alexander with her penetrating gaze. I studied engineering in college before I went into business, Alexander explained, impressed by her perception. I've always been fascinated by how things work. Like mommy with bodies, Micah added helpfully. She knows how everything inside people works. That's right, Naomi confirmed with a smile. Everyone has different things they're curious about. What else do you like besides space and money? Maya asked Alexander, clearly conducting her own personal assessment of this new figure in their lives. Alexander considered the question seriously. I enjoy sailing. Being out on the water helps me think clearly. I like classical music, particularly Bach. And I've always enjoyed building things. Models when I was younger, and now companies and projects. Do you have a boat? Micah asked, eyes wide. I do, Alexander admitted. A sailboat. Can we see it sometime? The hope in Micah's voice was palpable. Alexander glanced at Naomi, not wanting to overstep. Perhaps when you're fully recovered, if your mother agrees. We'll see, Naomi said. Her standard parental response non-committal but not dismissive. Now, who's ready for dessert? Ms. Rodriguez sent over her famous apple crisp. After dinner and dessert, Alexander helped the twins set up their modeling clay on the coffee table. As they worked together creating a solar system, complete with rings for Saturn and the appropriate number of moons for each planet, he found himself marveling at how natural it felt. This simple family evening that was simultaneously his first and felt somehow familiar, as though his body remembered a rhythm his mind had never known. When the twins began showing signs of fatigue, Naomi announced it was bath time, then bedtime. Alexander prepared to leave, not wanting to intrude on their established routine, but Micah had other ideas. Can Dad read our bedtime story tonight? He asked Naomi, his expression hopeful. Again, that word, Dad, sent a wave of emotion through Alexander. Naomi hesitated only briefly before nodding. If he has time. I have time, Alexander said quickly. Too quickly, perhaps, but he couldn't help himself. The opportunity to participate in this ritual felt precious, sacred almost. While Naomi supervised bath time, Alexander explored the twins' bedroom, taking in the details of their lives. The room was small but thoughtfully arranged, with two twin beds separated by a nightstand. One side, clearly Micah's, featured rocket posters and a shelf of toy spaceships. The other, Maya's, had a star chart on the wall and a collection of books neatly arranged by size. A hand-painted mural of the solar system covered one wall, the planets rendered with surprising accuracy and artistic skill. I painted that when they were 2, Naomi said from the doorway, making Alexander turn. They were going through a phase where they wouldn't sleep unless they could see the planets. It's beautiful, Alexander said sincerely. I didn't know you painted. There's a lot we didn't know about each other, Naomi replied, her tone not unkind but matter-of-fact. I started painting as stress relief during my first year of residency. It helps me process the difficult days. Before Alexander could respond, the twins burst into the room in matching space-themed pajamas, hair damp from their baths, faces glowing with the particular radiance of children who have successfully delayed bedtime by a few precious minutes. Story time, Micah announced, climbing into his bed. Dad's reading tonight. Maya approached her own bed more sedately, but her eyes held the same anticipation. Can we read the one about the girl astronaut? She asked, pointing to a book on her shelf. An excellent choice, Alexander said, retrieving the book and settling into the chair between their beds. As he began to read, he was acutely aware of Naomi watching from the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't fully decipher. The story was about a young girl who dreamed of traveling to the stars, facing and overcoming various obstacles through determination and creativity. Alexander read with animation, doing different voices for each character, earning giggles from Micah and thoughtful nods from Maya. By the time he finished, both children were heavy-lidded with sleep. He closed the book gently, then, after a moment's hesitation, leaned over to kiss first Micah's forehead, then Maya's. Good night, space explorers, he said softly. Sweet dreams. Night, Dad, Micah mumbled, already half asleep. Maya regarded him with drowsy seriousness. Will you come back tomorrow? If it's all right with your mother, Alexander replied, glancing at Naomi. We'll see, Naomi said again, but her tone was softer than before. Sleep well, my loves. In the living room, Alexander helped Naomi clean up the modeling clay and art supplies, working in a companionable silence that felt both strange and familiar. When everything was tidy, He knew it was time to leave, though every part of him resisted the idea of walking away from this apartment, from the children sleeping down the hall, from Naomi herself. "Thank you for tonight," he said, standing awkwardly by the door, "for letting me be part of their evening." Naomi studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "You're good with them. Better than I expected, honestly." "They make it easy," Alexander admitted. "They're extraordinary children." "Yes, they are." Pride colored her voice. "Alexander, we need to discuss how we're going to handle this going forward. The practical aspects of co-parenting, visitation schedules, financial arrangements, all of it." "Of course." He nodded, appreciating her directness. "Would you be comfortable meeting for lunch tomorrow? We could talk while the twins are at preschool." Surprise flickered across Naomi's face. "How did you know they attend preschool?" "Maya mentioned it yesterday at the hospital. She was telling me about their classroom's pet hamster." Alexander smiled slightly. She was quite concerned about whether it was being properly cared for in their absence. "That sounds like Maya." Naomi's expression softened momentarily before returning to its practical focus. "Lunch would work. There's a cafe near the hospital called Rosemary's. Noon. I'll be there." Alexander hesitated at the door. "Naomi, I know this is all happening very quickly, and I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I want you to know how grateful I am for the chance to know them, to be their father." Naomi's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, "They deserve to have a father who loves them, Alexander. I just hope you understand what that really means. The commitment, the consistency, the willingness to put their needs above everything else, including your family's expectations and your company's demands." "I do understand," he replied solemnly. "And I promise you, I will never let them down the way I let you down." Something flickered in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Naomi." As he walked to his car, Alexander felt both elated and humbled by the evening. The simple domestic scenes, dinner, crafts, bedtime stories, had affected him more deeply than any business triumph or acquisition. For the first time in his life, Alexander Pierce understood what it meant to be truly needed, truly important to someone else's world. The next day, Alexander arrived at Rosemary's Cafe 15 minutes early, selecting a quiet table in the corner that offered privacy for their conversation. He had spent the morning with his legal team, discussing trust funds, inheritance structures, and custody arrangements, all the practical matters that needed addressing. But as he waited for Naomi, his thoughts kept returning to Maya's serious eyes and Micah's unguarded smile. Naomi arrived precisely at noon, still in her scrubs, her copper hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired, Alexander noted, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from juggling too many responsibilities for too long. "Sorry I couldn't change," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Emergency consult ran long." "No apology necessary," Alexander assured her. "I ordered coffee. I remembered you take it with cream, no sugar, unless that's changed." Naomi looked momentarily surprised that he'd remembered such a detail. "That hasn't changed." A waitress brought their coffee and took their lunch orders. When she'd gone, Naomi fixed Alexander with her direct gaze. "Before we discuss arrangements, I need to know something," she said. "What exactly have you told your family about the twins?" "Just Elise, as I mentioned yesterday," Alexander replied. "I told her I'd discovered I'm a father to 3-year-old twins, and that you're their mother." She asked about them, what they're like, and offered her support. "And your parents?" "Nothing yet." Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "But they'll find out eventually, either from Elise or through their own sources. My mother still maintains connections in Boston society, despite living abroad." Naomi nodded, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against her coffee cup. "When they do find out, what do you expect their reaction to be?" It was a fair question, and one Alexander had been considering since the moment he'd learned about the twins. "Initially anger and disbelief," he said honestly, followed quickly by attempts to control the situation, likely offering financial settlements in exchange for keeping the children out of the public eye. And when that doesn't work, they'll try to establish themselves as grandparents on their terms, lavish gifts, trust funds with strings attached, attempts to shape the twins' futures according to Pierce family traditions. Alexander met her gaze directly. But they'll have no legal authority to do any of that. I've already taken steps to ensure it. Naomi raised an eyebrow. What steps? I've restructured my holdings to protect assets from family interference. I've updated my will to name you as the twins' guardian and trustee of their inheritance should anything happen to me. And I've made it clear to the board at Pierce Enterprises that my personal life is not up for discussion or negotiation. He paused. I've learned from my mistakes, Naomi. I won't allow my family to interfere in my children's lives the way they interfered in our relationship. Naomi studied him for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of the old Alexander, the man who had prioritized family legacy over love. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly. All right, she said. Let's discuss practical arrangements. For the next hour, they worked through the logistics of co-parenting. Alexander proposed a gradual increase in his time with the twins, starting with evening visits and weekend afternoons, eventually building to overnight stays once they were comfortable with him. Naomi agreed with the stipulation that she would be present for the first few weeks of visits. They need time to adjust to this new reality, she explained. Especially Maya. She processes changes more slowly than Micah. I've noticed, Alexander said. She observes everything, considers it carefully before responding. She reminds me of my grandfather in that way. He was the same, always 3 steps ahead because he took the time to analyze every angle. Your grandfather? Naomi looked surprised. You rarely spoke about him. He died when I was 12, Alexander explained. But he was different from my father, more thoughtful, less driven by appearances. He built the company from nothing, while my father was more concerned with maintaining status. He smiled slightly. I think Maya would have liked him. And Micah reminds me of my father, Naomi offered. The same enthusiasm, the same inability to contain his excitement about things that interest him. I'd like to meet your parents someday, Alexander said carefully, to thank them for everything they've done for the twins. For you. Naomi's expression softened slightly. They're planning to visit for the twins' 4th birthday next month. Perhaps you could join us for the celebration. The invitation, tentative as it was, felt significant. I'd be honored, Alexander said simply. As their lunch concluded, they moved on to financial matters. This was where Alexander anticipated the most resistance, knowing Naomi's fierce independence. I want to establish trust funds for their education and future needs, he began. And I'd like to contribute to their current expenses, healthcare, childcare, anything they require. Naomi's expression grew guarded. We've managed fine without financial support for 3 years, Alexander. I know you have, he acknowledged. And that's a testament to your strength and resourcefulness. But they're my children too, Naomi. Providing for them financially is both my responsibility and my right. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Educational trusts are reasonable. As for current expenses, we can discuss specific needs as they arise. But I don't want them suddenly showered with excessive luxury or spoiled with extravagant gifts. That's not how I want them raised. I understand and respect that, Alexander assured her. My goal isn't to change the wonderful life you've built for them, but to support it. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Alexander hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on him. Naomi, why did you call me that day at the hospital? You could have continued keeping the twins' existence from me. What changed? Naomi was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Several things, she finally said. Micah's illness was frightening. I realized how important it was for them to have medical history from both sides of their family. And as I mentioned, they've been asking more questions about you. She met his gaze directly. But mostly, I saw you that day at the hospital and you seemed different. There was something in your eyes, in the way you carried yourself. Less arrogance, more substance. I thought perhaps you might finally be the father they deserve. The assessment was both brutally honest and surprisingly hopeful. I'm trying to be, Alexander said quietly. Every day. I'm trying to be better than I was. Naomi nodded, then glanced at her watch. I need to get back to the hospital. The twins finish preschool at 3. Their neighbor, Mrs. Castillo, picks them up when I'm working. They'd be happy to see you this evening if you'd like to come by. I'd like that very much, Alexander replied, careful not to reveal how much the casual invitation meant to him. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Alexander felt a cautious optimism taking root. The path forward wouldn't be simple or easy, but it was clear. A path toward being the father his children needed and, perhaps someday, the man worthy of Naomi's trust once more. If you believe that our greatest growth often comes from our most painful mistakes, hit that like button. And if you've ever had to rebuild something precious that was once broken, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that remind us it's never too late to become the person we were meant to be. Over the next 3 weeks, Alexander established a new rhythm to his life, one centered entirely around Micah and Maya. He visited the apartment every evening he was invited, which quickly became most evenings. He rearranged his work schedule to be free by 5, delegating responsibilities that had once seemed crucial but now felt secondary to bedtime stories and dinner conversations. The twins adjusted to his presence with varying speeds. Micah embraced Alexander completely and immediately, his natural openness making the transition seamless. Maya remained more cautious, observing Alexander carefully, testing him with questions and challenges before gradually allowing herself to trust his consistency. "Why do you wear a tie every day?" she asked one evening as Alexander arrived directly from the office. "Is it a rule?" "It's a business custom," Alexander explained, kneeling to her level. "But not a rule I particularly enjoy." Without hesitation, Maya reached up and tugged at his tie. "You should take it off then. Mom says we don't have to do things that make us uncomfortable unless they're important, like medicine or vegetables." Alexander laughed, loosening the tie and slipping it off. "Your mother is very wise." "I know," Maya replied seriously. "She's the smartest person in the whole hospital. Dr. Wilson said so." These small moments, Maya's unexpected observations, Micah's enthusiastic hugs, the gradual building of trust and connection, became the highlights of Alexander's days. For the first time in his life, his identity was defined not by his family name or corporate position, but by being Micah and Maya's dad. The transformation was noticed at Pierce Enterprises. His executive team exchanged glances when he declined evening networking events to attend preschool parent nights. His assistant adjusted to scheduling important calls around bath time. His driver grew accustomed to making stops for children's books and art supplies. "You seem different," his CFO commented after a board meeting where Alexander had efficiently moved through the agenda in half the usual time. "More focused. Decisive. I have more important priorities now," Alexander replied simply. As the twins' 4th birthday approached, Alexander found himself increasingly integrated into their daily lives. He knew their favorite foods, dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets for Micah, anything with cheese for Maya, their bedtime routines, 2 stories minimum, with voices for all characters, and their current obsessions, rocket propulsion systems for Micah, black holes for Maya. The night before Naomi's parents were scheduled to arrive from Arizona, Alexander stayed late at the apartment, helping prepare for their visit. The twins were already asleep, exhausted from the excitement of anticipating their grandparents' arrival. "They've redecorated the guest room 3 times this week," Naomi said with a tired smile as she and Alexander folded laundry in the living room. Maya insisted the pillows needed to be symmetrically arranged, whatever that means to a 3-year-old. "She has your attention to detail," Alexander observed, carefully matching tiny socks. The domestic task felt strangely intimate, this shared responsibility for the small details of their children's lives. "And your perfectionist tendencies," Naomi countered, though her tone held no criticism. "Micah, on the other hand, has your ability to charm people into doing exactly what he wants." His preschool teacher mentioned he convinced the entire class to play Rocket launch. For a week straight. Alexander laughed. Future CEO material. God help us. Naomi replied with a smile that quickly faded into a more serious expression. Alexander, there's something we should discuss before my parents arrive. Of course. He set aside the laundry, giving her his full attention. They know everything, Naomi said directly. About your family's treatment of me, about why I left Boston, all of it. They were the ones who helped me start over when I first discovered I was pregnant. She hesitated. They may not be immediately welcoming. Alexander nodded, having expected as much. That's completely understandable. I'd be concerned if they weren't protective of you and the twins. They're good people, Naomi continued. Fair-minded and forgiving eventually. But they'll need to see for themselves that you're committed to the twins. That this isn't just... She trailed off. Just what? Alexander prompted gently. Naomi met his gaze directly. That this isn't just guilt or novelty or some Pierce family obligation. That you truly want to be their father, for the long haul, through tantrums and school problems and teenage rebellion and everything else that comes with parenthood. I do, Alexander said with quiet certainty. Naomi, these past weeks have been the most meaningful of my life. I can't imagine going back to the way things were before. The emptiness, the hollow achievements, the constant striving for things that don't actually matter. He paused. I know I have to earn your parents' trust, just as I'm earning yours and Maya's. I'm prepared to do that however long it takes. Naomi studied him for a long moment, then nodded. They arrive tomorrow at noon. The birthday party is Saturday at 2. Nothing fancy. Just cake and presents in the park down the street, with a few friends from preschool. Should I bring anything? Do anything specific to prepare? Just be yourself, Naomi advised. The version of yourself I've seen these past weeks with the twins. That's who they need to meet. The next day, Alexander arrived at the apartment precisely at 2, having deliberately given Naomi's family time to settle in before he appeared. He carried carefully wrapped presents for the twins and a bouquet of flowers, not ostentatious, but thoughtfully selected for Naomi's mother. Micah opened the door before Alexander could knock, practically vibrating with excitement. Dad, Grandma and Grandpa are here, and they brought us presents from Arizona. Come see. Alexander allowed himself to be pulled into the apartment, where he found Naomi in the kitchen with an older couple who could only be her parents. The family resemblance was striking. Naomi had her mother's copper hair and her father's green eyes and determined chin. Mom, Dad, Naomi said, her tone carefully neutral. This is Alexander Pierce. Alexander, my parents, Robert and Eleanor Turner. Robert Turner was a tall, distinguished man with silver-streaked dark hair and a professor's thoughtful demeanor. He extended his hand with formal politeness. Mr. Pierce. Please call me Alexander, he replied, shaking the offered hand firmly. Eleanor Turner was more openly assessing, her keen eyes, so like Naomi's, taking his measure with maternal protectiveness. We've heard quite a lot about you, she said, accepting the flowers with a small nod of thanks. I imagine you have, Alexander acknowledged, not shying away from the implied criticism. Most of it probably not very flattering, and deservedly so. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly at this direct acknowledgement. Refreshingly honest, at least. Grandpa, come see what Dad brought us. Micah interrupted, tugging at Robert's hand. He said we can't open them until tomorrow, but they're really big. Did he now? Robert allowed himself to be led to the living room where Alexander had placed the wrapped gifts. Those are impressive packages. Maya approached more cautiously, studying the interaction between her grandfather and father with serious attention. Dad knows how to wrap presents really well, she informed Eleanor. He makes the corners perfect, and he knows about black holes. 2 very important skills, Eleanor replied with a small smile, her expression softening as she observed Maya's clear acceptance of Alexander. The afternoon progressed with a careful civility that gradually warmed as the Turners witnessed Alexander's interactions with the twins. He deferred to Naomi on parenting decisions, engaged genuinely with the children's excitement, and made no attempt to impress or overwhelm with his wealth or status. When the twins went down for their afternoon nap, exhausted from the excitement, the adults gathered in the living room for coffee. The conversation remained polite but probing, as Robert and Eleanor clearly sought to understand Alexander's intentions. "Naomi tells us you've been visiting regularly," Eleanor said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "That must be quite an adjustment to your schedule." "The only adjustment that matters," Alexander replied honestly. "Everything else in my life has been rearranged to accommodate time with Micah and Maya." "And your family?" Robert asked directly. "How have they responded to the news?" "My sister has been supportive," Alexander said. "My parents haven't been informed yet, though that will likely change soon. When it does, I want to assure you that their reactions or demands will have no bearing on my relationship with the twins or my co-parenting with Naomi." Robert and Eleanor exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. "We were there when Naomi arrived in Arizona 4 years ago," Robert said quietly. "We saw what your family's actions did to her. The humiliation, the threats, the fear." "Dad," Naomi interjected, but Robert held up a hand. "No, this needs to be said." He fixed Alexander with a steady gaze. "She was pregnant, alone, and terrified that your family would follow through on their threats to destroy her career and future. We watched her build a new life from nothing, work her way through medical school while caring for twins, sacrifice everything for those children." His voice remained calm but carried unmistakable emotion. "So you'll understand why we might be concerned about your sudden appearance in their lives." Alexander met the older man's gaze directly. "I understand completely, and you're right to be concerned. 4 years ago, I failed Naomi in every way a man could fail the woman he loved. I chose family obligation over personal integrity. I chose the path of least resistance over standing up for what was right." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I can't change that past. I can only demonstrate through consistent actions that I'm not that man anymore. That I will never again allow anyone, family or otherwise, to harm Naomi or our children." Eleanor studied him with the same penetrating gaze Naomi often used. "And what happens when the novelty wears off? When being a father means missed meetings for school emergencies, or teenage rebellion, or ordinary family struggles that can't be solved with money or influence?" "With all due respect, Mrs. Turner," Alexander replied, "there is nothing novel about my commitment to Micah and Maya. From the moment I learned of their existence, they became the center of my world. Not because of obligation or guilt, though I carry plenty of the latter, but because they are extraordinary children who deserve a father who will move heaven and earth for them." He leaned forward slightly. "I understand your skepticism. I've done nothing to earn your trust yet. But I hope you'll give me the opportunity to prove, over time, that my commitment to them is absolute and unconditional." Another silent exchange passed between the Turners before Robert spoke again. "Naomi tells us you've been respectful of the boundaries she's established, that you haven't tried to overwhelm the children with extravagant gifts or use your resources to—" "What was the phrase, Eleanor?" "Buy their affection or override her parenting," Eleanor supplied. "That's right." Robert nodded. "That speaks well of you, at least. The life Naomi has built for them is wonderful," Alexander said sincerely. "My goal isn't to change it, but to support it, to add to their security and happiness without undermining the values she's instilled." Naomi, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. "He's been good with them," she said softly. "Better than I expected. They adore him, especially Micah. And Maya." She smiled slightly. "Maya has subjected him to her usual thorough evaluation and apparently found him acceptable." "High praise indeed from our granddaughter," Eleanor said with the first genuine smile she directed at Alexander. "She has exacting standards." "She does," Alexander agreed, returning the smile. "I'm still working to earn her full approval. Last week she informed me my knowledge of constellation patterns was mostly correct but needs improvement." This drew a laugh from Robert. "That sounds like Maya. She told me my dinosaur facts were outdated when I last visited." The conversation gradually shifted to safer topics. the twins' development, their current interests, plans for the birthday celebration. By the time Micah and Maya woke from their naps, the atmosphere had warmed considerably, though Alexander knew he still had much to prove to Naomi's parents. The twins' excitement at having both their grandparents and their father in the same room was palpable. Micah bounced between them, showing Robert a model rocket Alexander had helped him build while simultaneously telling Eleanor about the space cake they were having for their birthday. Maya, more contained but equally pleased, carefully explained to Alexander the proper protocol for the birthday celebration as established by Turner family tradition. "First cake, then presents, then we make wishes," she informed him seriously. "Grandma says wishes after cake work better because you're happier." "That makes perfect sense," Alexander agreed solemnly. "Your grandmother is very wise." Eleanor, overhearing this, gave Alexander an appraising look that held a hint of grudging approval. As the evening progressed, he found himself included in family conversations and memories, treated not quite as one of them, but no longer as an outsider to be viewed with suspicion. When it was time for him to leave, Robert walked him to the door while Naomi helped the twins prepare for their bath. "I meant what I said earlier," the older man said quietly. "We saw what Naomi went through. The pregnancy alone was difficult, but doing it while finishing medical school, starting over in a new place, constantly looking over her shoulder for fear your family would find her." He shook his head. "It was a hard time." "I can't imagine," Alexander replied honestly, "and I can never adequately apologize for my role in causing that pain." "No, you can't," Robert agreed bluntly. "But what you can do is ensure those children never experience a moment of doubt about their father's love or commitment. That's what matters now." "I give you my word," Alexander said. "They are, and will always be, my highest priority." Robert studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Eleanor and I will be watching, of course. But for what it's worth, what I've seen today gives me cautious hope that you might be the father they deserve." Coming from Naomi's protective father, it was high praise indeed. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal." The twins' birthday celebration the following day was exactly as Naomi had described: simple, joyful, focused entirely on the children's happiness rather than impression or extravagance. The small park near their apartment was perfect for the handful of preschool friends who attended, running and playing on the playground equipment, while parents chatted nearby. Alexander found himself in the unusual position of being introduced as Micah and Maya's dad, to people who had no idea who Alexander Pierce was in the business world, and cared even less. These parents judged him solely on his interactions with the twins and his respectful partnership with Naomi. It was refreshingly straightforward. When it came time for presents, Alexander watched nervously as the twins opened his gifts, carefully chosen with Naomi's guidance to be special but not ostentatious. For Micah, a telescope designed for young children, with a sturdy base and simple controls. For Maya, a detailed anatomy model with removable parts, combining her interest in how things worked with her growing curiosity about her mother's profession. "Wow!" Micah exclaimed, examining the telescope with reverent hands. "Now I can see the real planets. Can we set it up tonight, Dad?" "Please, if it's all right with your mother," Alexander replied, glancing at Naomi, who nodded her permission. Maya was methodically examining each piece of the anatomy model, her expression serious but pleased. "This is the heart," she informed Alexander, holding up the small red piece. "It has 4 chambers and valves that go whoosh whoosh." "That's exactly right," Alexander confirmed, touched by her immediate engagement with the gift. "The model comes with a book that explains how each part works." "Thank you," Maya said formally. Then, to Alexander's surprise, she stepped forward and hugged him quickly before returning to her examination of the model. The simple gesture, Maya's first spontaneous display of physical affection toward him, affected Alexander more deeply than any business achievement ever had. He caught Naomi's eye over Maya's head and saw that she had noticed the significance of the moment as well, her expression softening in a way that made his heart constrict. Later, as the party wound down and the twins played with their friends on the playground, Eleanor approached Alexander where he stood watching them. Those were thoughtful gifts, she observed. Educational but exciting. You clearly paid attention to their interests. I wanted to get them something meaningful, Alexander replied. Something that would grow with them. Eleanor nodded, her gaze following her grandchildren. Robert and I have been talking. We'd like to invite you to join us for dinner tomorrow evening. Just the adults. There are things we should discuss regarding the twins' future, and it would be good to do so without little ears present. The invitation, while not exactly warm, represented a significant step forward. I'd be honored, Alexander said sincerely. Thank you. The dinner the following evening was held at a small Italian restaurant near Naomi's apartment. The conversation began cautiously but gradually relaxed as they discussed the twins' birthday celebration and their obvious delight in having both sets of important adults in their lives present. Over dessert, Robert broached the subject that had clearly been on his and Eleanor's minds. Naomi has told us about your financial proposals for the twins, he said directly. The trust funds, the educational provisions, the offer to contribute to their current expenses. Alexander nodded, glancing at Naomi, who gave a small shrug. I want to ensure their future security while respecting Naomi's parenting approach and independence. A commendable balance to strike, Robert acknowledged. But there's something else we need to address. The potential involvement of your family once they learn about the twins. As I mentioned yesterday, my parents will have no authority or influence over Micah and Maya, Alexander stated firmly. I've taken legal steps to ensure that. Legal steps may protect their financial interests, Eleanor pointed out. But what about their emotional well-being? What happens when your parents decide they want access to their grandchildren? When they attempt to use their considerable resources and connections to insert themselves into the twins' lives? It was a valid concern, one Alexander had been considering since the moment he'd learned about his children. My parents' approach to grandparenting would likely be similar to their approach to parenting, controlling, status-conscious, and conditional, he acknowledged. That's not something I want Micah and Maya exposed to. And yet, Robert said carefully, they are the children's biological grandparents. Complete exclusion might raise questions as the twins get older. Alexander considered this thoughtfully. You're right. At some point, they may want to know that side of their family. My hope is that by then, my parents might have softened their perspectives. My father's health scare changed him somewhat, made him more reflective. He looked directly at Naomi. But any contact would be on our terms, with our supervision, and only if you were comfortable with it. Naomi nodded slowly. I don't want to keep them from any family who genuinely loves them. I just need to know they'll be protected from the kind of manipulation and judgment I experienced. They will be, Alexander promised. Always. Eleanor studied him with that penetrating gaze again. And your sister? You mentioned she's been supportive. Elise has changed significantly in the past few years, Alexander explained. Her divorce was difficult. Her husband was controlling, emotionally abusive. The experience gave her perspective on our family dynamics that she hadn't had before. He paused. She's expressed genuine remorse for her role in what happened with Naomi, and a sincere desire to know her niece and nephew. Would you be comfortable with that? Robert asked Naomi directly. With Elise meeting the twins? Naomi was quiet for a moment, considering. Perhaps, eventually, under controlled circumstances at first. She glanced at Alexander. People can change. I've seen evidence of that recently. The comment, simple as it was, carried significant weight. It was the first time Naomi had openly acknowledged her belief in Alexander's transformation. We should return to Arizona knowing that the twins' future is secure, Robert said, bringing the conversation back to practical matters. That arrangements are in place for co-parenting, financial support, and protection from potential family interference. I've prepared documents outlining everything we've discussed, Alexander said. Trust structures, custody arrangements, healthcare provisions. I'd be happy to have your family attorney review them. That would be appropriate, Robert agreed. And appreciated. As the evening concluded, Eleanor surprised Alexander by taking his hand briefly. You're not what I expected, she admitted. Based on Naomi's descriptions of you 4 years ago, I anticipated someone different. I was different 4 years ago, Alexander acknowledged. Less aware of what truly matters. Less willing to stand up for it. Eleanor nodded. Keep proving us wrong, Mr. Pierce. Those children deserve nothing less than your absolute best. I intend to, he promised. Every day. The Turners' visit concluded 2 days later, with farewells that were significantly warmer than their initial greeting had been. Alexander had earned, if not their complete trust, at least their cautious acceptance. It was a beginning. As he helped load their luggage into the taxi for the airport, Robert pulled him aside for a final word. Naomi doesn't give second chances easily, he said quietly. The fact that she's allowing you into the twins' lives speaks volumes about what she's seen in you these past weeks. Don't squander that trust. I won't, Alexander assured him. It's more precious to me than anything. After the Turners departed, Alexander found himself alone with Naomi for the first time in days, the twins having been invited to a playdate with friends from the birthday party. Your parents are remarkable people, he said as they cleaned up the remains of breakfast. I see where you get your strength and principles. They've always been my foundation, Naomi agreed. When I left Boston, they didn't just take me in. They helped me rebuild my confidence, reminded me of who I was beyond what had happened. She glanced at him. They were impressed by you, more than they let on. I'm glad, Alexander said sincerely. Their opinion matters, both for the twins' sake and because they're important to you. Naomi was quiet for a moment, wiping down the kitchen counter with methodical movements. These past few weeks have been surprising, she finally said. Watching you with Micah and Maya, seeing how naturally you've adapted to fatherhood, how respectful you've been of our boundaries. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. You really have changed, Alexander. The simple acknowledgement meant more to him than any business accolade ever had. They changed me, he said honestly. From the moment I saw them in that hospital room, everything shifted. Priorities, perspective, purpose. All of it realigned around them. And your family? Naomi asked, the question that had always hovered between them. When they inevitably find out and make demands, issue ultimatums, threaten consequences, then they'll discover exactly how much I've changed, Alexander replied, his voice quiet but firm. Because nothing, not family legacy, not corporate power, not social standing, nothing is more important to me than Micah and Maya. And, he added carefully, than making amends to you if that's ever possible. Naomi's expression softened slightly. We're finding our way forward, Alexander. One day at a time. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement of possibility, of a path forward that might someday lead to healing. For now, that was enough. If you believe that true redemption comes through actions, not just words, hit that like button. And if you've ever witnessed how children can transform us into better versions of ourselves, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that remind us of what truly matters in this life. The inevitable confrontation with Alexander's parents came sooner than expected. 3 days after the Turners returned to Arizona, Alexander received a call from his sister while at the office. They know, Elise said without preamble. Mother called me this morning, absolutely livid. Apparently one of her Boston friends saw you at the park with Naomi and the twins and recognized you. The friend described the children as unmistakably Pierce's and asked if you'd been hiding a secret family. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, having anticipated this moment but hoped for more time to prepare. How much did you tell her? Nothing specific, Elise assured him. I said I knew you'd reconnected with Naomi, but that any details were yours to share. She's on the warpath, Alexander. They're cutting their Cayman Islands stay short and flying to Boston tomorrow. Of course they are, Alexander said grimly. Thank you for the warning. What can I do to help? Elise asked, her support a relatively new but welcome development in their relationship. Keep me informed of their movements, Alexander replied, and be prepared to meet your niece and nephew soon, under happier circumstances than this impending confrontation. After hanging up, Alexander immediately called Naomi, who was between hospital shifts. "My parents know," he said directly. "They're flying to Boston tomorrow." Naomi was silent for a moment. "What do they intend to do?" "Knowing them, they'll attempt to see me first, to handle the situation privately. When that fails, they may try to contact you directly." Alexander's voice hardened. "Which they will not be doing. I've already instructed security at both Pierce Enterprises and my building to deny them access. I'll be meeting them at a neutral location of my choosing." "Alexander," Naomi said carefully, "this is exactly what I feared. Your family creating chaos in the twins' lives." "They won't get near the twins," Alexander promised. "Or you. This is my battle to fight, and I intend to make my position absolutely clear to them. And if they don't accept that position, if they threaten legal action or use their connections to cause problems, then they'll discover I've learned a few things about wielding power myself these past 4 years," Alexander replied, his tone leaving no doubt about his determination. "Trust me, Naomi, I won't let them disrupt what we're building." The following day, Alexander arranged to meet his parents at a private dining room in a downtown restaurant, neutral territory where he could control the interaction. He arrived early, instructing the staff about the strict privacy he required and ensuring all details were arranged to his specifications. When Charles and Victoria Pierce entered the room, Alexander was struck by how they had aged in the years since he'd last seen them. His father, once the commanding presence in any room, now moved with the careful gait of a man who had faced his mortality. His mother, still elegant and immaculately dressed, had new lines around her mouth and eyes that spoke of displeasure rather than laughter. "Alexander," Victoria said, her voice carrying the precise modulation of old Boston society, "I see you've arranged this meeting with your usual attention to privacy. How considerate, given the circumstances." "Mother, father." Alexander remained standing, not moving to embrace either of them. "Please sit down." Charles Pierce lowered himself into a chair, studying his son with narrowed eyes. "I assume you know why we've cut our trip short." "I do." Alexander took his own seat, maintaining eye contact. "You've heard about my children." "Children," Victoria repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "So it's true. That girl trapped you after all." Alexander's expression hardened. "That girl is Dr. Naomi Turner, a pediatric resident at St. Catherine's Hospital, and no one trapped anyone. I only learned about the twins 3 weeks ago." "3 weeks," Charles said flatly. "And you didn't think to inform us that we have grandchildren?" "Frankly, no," Alexander replied. "Given your past treatment of Naomi, I saw no reason to rush that particular announcement." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Ancient history. What matters now is damage control. We need to establish paternity officially, of course, and then arrange appropriate financial settlements and confidentiality agreements." "There will be no damage control," Alexander stated firmly. "Micah and Maya are my children. I've already confirmed paternity, though it was unnecessary. They both carry unmistakable Pierce traits. There will be no confidentiality agreements, no settlements, no attempts to hide or minimize their existence." Charles leaned forward, his businessman's instincts engaging. "Be reasonable, Alexander. We need to manage this situation carefully. The company's public image, the family reputation. The company is doing exceptionally well under my leadership," Alexander interrupted. "And as for the family reputation, perhaps it could benefit from being associated with something genuine for once, rather than the carefully constructed facade we've maintained for years." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You cannot possibly intend to publicly acknowledge these children, to bring them into the Pierce family as if they're my son and daughter?" "That's exactly what I intend," Alexander stated. "Micah and Maya Pierce are my children, my heirs, and the future of this family, whether you approve or not." "And their mother?" Charles asked, his tone calculating. "What role do you envision for her in this arrangement?" "Naomi is their mother. We are co-parenting. The specific arrangements of our relationship are not open for discussion or negotiation." Alexander's voice was firm. What is non-negotiable is that you will treat her with absolute respect if you ever hope to have any relationship with your grandchildren. Victoria's laugh was brittle. Respect? For the woman who concealed our grandchildren for years, who used them to manipulate her way back into your life. She didn't conceal them from me out of malice, Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet. She concealed them out of protection. From you, from father, from the threats you made about destroying her career and future if she ever trapped a Pierce with a pregnancy. Those were your exact words at the charity gala, Mother. Do you recall? Victoria had the grace to look momentarily discomfited before rallying. I was protecting the family interests. No, you were protecting your own narrow vision of what this family should be. Alexander leaned forward. Let me be absolutely clear. Micah and Maya are my highest priority. Any relationship you have with them will be on terms that Naomi and I establish together. It will be respectful, positive, and completely free of manipulation or attempts to control. Charles studied his son with new awareness. You've changed, he observed, neither approving nor disapproving, simply noting the fact. Yes, Alexander agreed. Fundamentally. And if we choose not to accept these conditions? Victoria asked, her chin lifting in the stubborn gesture Alexander knew well. Then you will have no relationship with your grandchildren, Alexander stated simply. I won't expose them to the same toxic dynamics I grew up with. They deserve better. A heavy silence fell over the table. Charles was the first to break it, his businessman's pragmatism asserting itself. You seem to have thought this through carefully. What exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything, Alexander corrected. I'm informing you of how things will be. If you wish to be grandparents to Micah and Maya, you will respect their mother, respect our parenting decisions, and interact with them in positive, supportive ways only. No attempts to mold them into your vision of proper Pierces. No undermining Naomi's authority or values. No lavish gifts designed to buy influence. Victoria opened her mouth to object, but Charles placed a restraining hand on her arm. And if we agree to these terms? He asked. Then, eventually, you may meet them, Alexander said. After Naomi and I are confident you can be trusted to abide by our boundaries. Any violation of those boundaries will result in immediate and permanent restrictions. You would keep us from our own grandchildren? Victoria asked, genuine hurt finally breaking through her controlled facade. I would protect my children from anyone who might harm them emotionally, Alexander corrected gently. Even their grandparents, especially their grandparents, given our family history. Another silence fell, this one more contemplative. Charles studied his son with new respect, recognizing the steel beneath the civilized exterior, a quality he had instilled but never expected to have turned against him. They're truly that important to you, he said finally. These children you've known for mere weeks. From the moment I learned of their existence, Alexander confirmed. Nothing in my life has ever mattered more. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her composure finally cracking. I always wanted grandchildren, she said quietly, though perhaps not quite like this. They're extraordinary children, Alexander said, his voice softening slightly. Brilliant, curious, completely unique. Micah is enthusiastic and open-hearted. Maya is thoughtful and analytical. They both love space, stars and rockets. Something in his description, the genuine warmth and pride, seemed to reach Victoria in a way his arguments hadn't. They sound remarkable, she admitted. They are. Alexander pulled out his phone, hesitated, then made a decision. Would you like to see a picture? Both his parents leaned forward with undisguised interest as Alexander displayed a photo taken at the birthday party. The twins standing together, Micah beaming widely while Maya offered her more reserved smile, both wearing party hats and looking undeniably like Pierces. They have your eyes, Charles observed quietly. Both of them. And your mother's chin, Victoria added, touching the screen gently. The Pierce profile. Alexander watched his parents studying the image of their grandchildren, seeing the first genuine emotion either had displayed in years. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet, but it was a beginning. A crack in the formidable wall of Pierce family pride. "I need your answer," he said finally. "Can you accept the boundaries I've outlined? Can you respect Naomi's role and our parenting decisions? Because if not, this conversation ends here." Charles and Victoria exchanged a long look, decades of marriage allowing for silent communication. Finally, Charles turned back to his son. "We would like the opportunity to know our grandchildren," he said formally. "On the terms you've established. We can adapt," Victoria added, the concession clearly difficult for her. "For the sake of family." Alexander nodded, neither fully trusting nor completely dismissing their agreement. "We'll proceed cautiously, then. I'll discuss this with Naomi. If she's comfortable, we can arrange a brief, supervised meeting in the coming weeks." As the meeting concluded and his parents prepared to leave, Victoria paused beside Alexander. "This Dr. Turner," she said carefully. "You still care for her?" It wasn't a question, but Alexander answered anyway. "I never stopped." Victoria studied her son's face, seeing something there that seemed to surprise her. "Then perhaps we made a greater mistake 4 years ago than we realized." It was as close to an admission of wrongdoing as Victoria Pierce had ever come. Alexander accepted it with a slight nod, not pushing for more. "Safe travels back to the Caymans," he said. "I'll be in touch about arrangements for meeting the twins." After his parents departed, Alexander remained in the private dining room, processing the encounter. It had gone better than he'd feared, but not as well as he'd hoped. His parents had agreed to his terms, but whether they would truly abide by them remained to be seen. The Pierce family talent for strategic concession was legendary, appearing to yield while simply changing tactics. Still, he had made his position clear. For the first time in his life, Alexander had directly opposed his parents' wishes and established his own boundaries. It was a watershed moment not just for his relationship with them, but for his own sense of identity and purpose. That evening, he recounted the meeting to Naomi while the twins played in their room. She listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "Do you believe them?" she asked when he'd finished. "That they'll respect our boundaries?" "I believe they want to know Micah and Maya," Alexander replied honestly. Whether that desire is strong enough to overcome decades of controlling behavior remains to be seen. That's why any initial meetings would be brief and fully supervised by both of us. Naomi nodded slowly. "I don't want to keep the twins from any family who genuinely loves them. But I need to be certain they won't try to undermine what we're building or turn the children against me in subtle ways." "They won't have the opportunity," Alexander assured her. "We present a united front on this, Naomi. Any interaction with my parents happens only with both our approval." She studied him for a long moment. "You really did stand up to them. Set boundaries. Protect our family." "Our family?" Alexander repeated softly, the phrase warming him from within. "Yes, that's what we are now, in whatever form that takes." Naomi's expression softened. "The twins should meet their grandparents eventually. We can start with a short visit, perhaps in a public place like the park. Neutral territory." "Thank you," Alexander said simply, "for being willing to consider it after everything they did." "I'm not doing it for them," Naomi clarified. "I'm doing it for Micah and Maya. And," she added quietly, "because you've earned my trust these past weeks. You've proven that the children come first for you, above everything else." The acknowledgement meant more to Alexander than any business success ever had. "They do," he confirmed. "They always will." From down the hall came the sound of Micah's laughter, followed by Maya's more reserved but equally joyful response. The simple domestic sound, his children playing together in their home, filled Alexander with a contentment he had never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead with his parents, with balancing work and fatherhood, with navigating his evolving relationship with Naomi, Alexander knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. After years of emptiness disguised as success, he had finally found his true purpose. Not in the Pierce family legacy or corporate achievements, but in the love of two small children who had claimed his heart completely from the moment he'd learned of their existence. And perhaps, someday, in rebuilding what he had once lost with the remarkable woman who had given him this second chance he'd never expected and would forever cherish. If you believe that true family is defined by love and commitment rather than blood or tradition, hit that like button. And if you've ever experienced how the love of a child can completely transform your priorities and perspective, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that remind us what truly matters in this journey we call life. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to become the person your children, or the child you once were, needed you to be.